Good day. How are you today? I'm Brian Nash from How We Got Here Genealogy, History Lenses. I'm welcoming viewers to from my History Lenses channel as well. If you haven't been to one of my live streams before, the way I work it, I usually have a topic I discuss, and at the end, I have a chance for questions and answers, and I'd love you to stick around to then. If you're watching this on the replay, I hope you get something out of this. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about a period of history that happened in Scotland. And so this is not genealogical necessarily completely in nature, though people with Scottish ancestry, it's important to know these things and give you an understanding of the culture and the events that happened in your ancestors' lives. So I'm talking about a period of history called the Killing Times. Now, as you can imagine by the name, it wasn't a pleasant period in Scottish history. It derives its name from, well, basically Scottish Covenenater or Scottish Presbyterians were basically being hunted down, being killed. I'm going to focus today actually on a particular story that is one I heard many years ago. It's about this. Well, it was about not just these two women. It was actually there was multiple people that happened at this time, but the story is going to focus specifically on these two women named Margaret, one being older and one being younger, and how they were brutally put to death. And the reason is they refuse to say that the king was more important than Christ, basically, that they would be ruled above by the king above Christ. And this is really a poignant thing. I'm a Presbyterian on my mom's side by tradition and from the family, though I was raised in a Catholic church. But I later became a Reformed Presbyterian. Some people might call me a Calvinist. It's a term that's been used, but I refer the term I'm an Evangelical Reformed Presbyterian. By Reformed, it means that I hold to the principles of the Protestant Reformation. And you would think, well, all Presbyterians are Protestants, so don't they? And no, many of the precepts and the things that were important in the Reformation have been put aside for in many Presbyterian churches that you find in Canada, the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and in Scotland itself. The particular church I go to is called the Free Church of Scotland. Here on Prince Edward Island. It's a great church, a great minister that we have currently, who is faithful to the teachings of the Bible as understand from the perspective of the Reformation. So these killing times were the Scottish, they were called Covenanters. And the reason they were called Covenanters is because one of the historical documents that Reformed Presbyterians hold to is something called the Westminster Confession of Faith. This was basically a confession of faith that laid out what you believed as a Scottish Presbyterian, as a Reformed Presbyterian. Well, at that time, there was no other type of Presbyterian. And it differentiated between the Episcopalian Church that was of England, the Church of England, and the idea of Presbyterianism. One of the big differences is the ecclesiastical nature of the Anglican Church as opposed to the Presbyterian churches. One of the things is really interesting. The Queen, and I point out, she died as a Presbyterian since she was in Scotland. In Presbyterian churches, the king or queen are members of the church, whereas in the Church of England, the king or the queen are the head of the church. Whereas in Scottish Presbyterian, they are an equal member, because Christ in the sphere of religion is king. So these Covenanters, out of the Westminster Confession of Faith, there was also something that came about called the Solemn League and Covenant. And basically these were the people who signed that they believed these things. And when William Cromwell was trying to start the English Revolution, and they were trying to get rid of the king and queen, he relied on a lot of support of the Covenanters, which was eventually was basically turned away afterwards. In fact, the Covenanters later sided with King Charles II, and he actually turned their back when he got to England. He used them and turned his back. Anyways, these girls and many others like them were martyred because they held to the beliefs. So I'm going to actually, I found really great recently a Scottish YouTuber that I hadn't really watched much of. And I've talked about Scottish history tours in the past, and he actually recently did a video on this as well. But this is a video by a Scottish YouTuber called Scotland Unplugged. And I really recommend, if you want to learn some history of Scotland and see the places. He does some really great, I want to call it in vlog style, because he visits a lot of locations. He'll go walking the fields where battles were held, etc. Anyways, he talks about these particular martyrs. And anything I could say, I found that I wanted to say, he says so much better, because he's there and he has the means of doing it. So I'm going to share that, and I'm going to stop it. I'm going to talk a little bit about some things. And again, remember, stick around till the end so you can ask your questions. And again, from a genealogical perspective, it's important to understand these are the things that shaped your ancestors. These were some of the things that had happened in their family's recent past, before they came to the New World, before they came to Canada, United States, Australia. And if you're in Scotland, these are the things that your forefathers who lived on the land you live now had to endure, all for the cause of their faith and what they believed. And I find it really hard, as a Christian these days, a lot of times you're challenged, and you're left to wonder, would you have show the faith that these people during this time, this particularly the second Margaret Wilson, who's the younger one, the faith that she showed. So I'm going to start that video now from Scotland Unplugged, and we'll talk about it. So I just want to make sure that the audio is set there. Just 1 second here. 1 second here. I want to make sure I actually see that with the audio. And okay, perfect. I have it set to share the audio. So let's go.
Why does this town have so many bookshops? Why does the name have nothing whatsoever to do with hairpieces? And why were 2 women drowned at the stake here in 1685? That got dark quite quickly. Welcome to Scotland Unplugged. I'm Robert Parker, and this is the story of the Wigtown Martyrs. And it's kind of personal. Cross the border from England into Scotland, hang a sharp right, and you'll find Galloway. It's kind of like Scotland in miniature. It has a little bit of everything. Hills, sea, rivers, history, mythology, and just like everywhere else, just a little bit of darkness hiding under the surface. And this is Wigtown. Nothing to do with actual wigs. The theory goes that the name has to do with the bay it sits on, Whigby, or Vicby, which is a sort of anglicised corruption of the Old Norse for water inlet. Baby. So big a view, they named it twice. Galloway translates very roughly as amongst the stranger gale. The stranger gales in question were a bit mixed up. They were probably a mix of Gaelic and Scandinavian. This place wasn't even part of Scotland until 1234, and it kind of still feels like somewhere else. It's not quite Scotland, not quite Ireland. Maybe I can't actually say that. Maybe I'm not qualified. I'm slightly biased because I'm from here. I grew up in and around Wigtown, and my mum's from there. My mum's whole family are from there. In fact, my mum still lives there and owns a coffee shop in the town, which I like to visit frequently. Wigtown is Scotland's national book town and has been officially that since about 1998. There are roughly 20.
So what he's doing here is he's just actually giving you a really good introduction to the community itself. So he hasn't quite got to the history part that we're going to be talking about, but it is really interesting. And I like I said, I just want to share the whole video and talk about it because it is he tells the story well. And it is interesting when you do search Wigtown. If you search just Wigtown, one of the first things that comes up is the talk about their bookstores, and he's going to go into a little bit of that. I really like that because I'm kind of a bibliophile myself. I love old books. So let's go from here.
Bookshops in the town and around the town. The biggest one, the biggest second-hand bookshop in Scotland, in fact, is the one that's called the Bookshop. It's owned by a guy called Sean Bethel, who's had quite a few bestsellers with his diaries. But the reason this one's particularly interesting to me is because it used to be my great-granddad's draper's shop. Apparently, he had a spaniel that would sit in the window and would climb out at the end of the day, telling everyone it was home time. These are the county buildings, built in 1862 in French Gothic style and sitting at the heart of things. It used to be the sort of centre of administration and the home of the county court. My granddad was actually the court officer there, and part of his job meant that he had to live on the premises. I thought that was his house. But I did always wonder about the cell at the bottom of the stairs. Usually when I was going up those stairs on the way to my bed. A few weeks ago, I did a video about Greyfriars Cemetery, and as part of that, I spoke about the killing times and the Scottish Covenant. The Stuart kings ruled over Scotland and England. Religion was always going to be a bugbear. James VI of Scotland eventually inherited the throne of England from his cousin Elizabeth I. He was expected to be Catholic, like his mother, Mary Queen of Scots, and to restore the old religion to England. When that didn't happen, Guy Fawkes tried to blow up the Houses of Parliament. Scotland and England had separate churches, still do, but James wanted them as one church, one country, one ruler. Maybe you heard something like that before. His son and grandson, Charles I and Charles II, saw themselves as Episcopalians. They believed in divine right, specifically the divine right of the Stuart kings to be in charge. They believed they were put there by God and therefore head of the church. The Covenanters didn't really agree, and after signing their covenant in Greyfriars Church, they refused to submit to the crown. They'd meet up and worship in hidden places, but they were persecuted for it. It came at a cost. About 18,000 of them were killed between 1679 and 1688, a period of history known as...
So that's a large number, 18,000. That's a population of a good-sized town. In fact, the city closest to me on Prince Edward Island doesn't have that many more people living there than that. So it's a big, it's a large number of people when you think of it that way.
in Scotland as the Killing Times. And here in Wigtown in 1685 was one of the worst atrocities of the whole sorry tale.
Hello everyone. Today I'm going to be showing you how to use words to make your videos really pop and stand out.
Remove this for a second. And then I'm going to just add this back in because we don't need to watch their ad. So let's add this back and we'll continue.
Take a wander down to the shore, along the old railway line, and you'll find a walkway leading out into the salt marsh and the sea beyond.
So this is one of the things that I said makes his videos that I've watched so good, is his ability to go to the sites and take you there, and he makes you feel like you're there with him, so which helps history come alive.
Unfortunately, this is the point where my carefully considered voiceover and atmospheric music goes horribly wrong. I turned up on the day and realised that they've actually taken away the old walkway in preparation for putting in a new one because the old one was apparently dangerous. Luckily, 2021 me has us covered. I'd like to say I foretold the whole thing and that it was kind of second sight in it or just being sensible or something like that. But what actually happened was I turned up 2 years ago, realised I didn't know enough about the Wigtown Martyrs to make a video about them, took some footage anyway just because it was a nice day, and then staggered off home. Ill-advisedly, I decided to subsidise my 2 years ago self's footage with my drone, which resulted in a bit of a, we'll call it a drone incident, where I sort of misjudged the position of some branches on a tree. Still, I'll just add that to my list of things I've broken and need fixed today. There are actually 5 Wigtown martyrs. The most famous would be 2 women, Margaret McLaughlin, who was 63, and Margaret Wilson, who was 18. There are also 3 men, William Johnson, John Mulroy, and George Walker. Mulroy is kind of an unusual Wigtownshire name, but more on that later. The 3 men were hunted down by the hated Major Windram and hung without trial, although not much is actually known about them beyond that. The women are probably better remembered by history because of Margaret Wilson's age, but also because of what happened to them. Margaret Wilson.
So, and listen to this. This is interesting just because of the way they treated men and women differently, even in execution.
Grew up on a farm near Newton Stewart called Glenvernach. Weirdly, when I was 18, I actually helped out on that farm a few times. Her parents were Episcopalians. They'd taken the pledge they had to. They attended the services they were supposed to for fear of being reported for withdrawing. But her brothers were Covenanters. By February 1685, Scotland and England had a new king, James II of England and James VII of Scotland. There had been kind of hopes for things getting better with James actually being Catholic. He was actually the last Catholic monarch of the UK. But that didn't quite pan out. Thomas Wilson had disappeared into the hills to join a group hiding out there. His sisters, Margaret and Agnes, came here to Wigtown to visit some friends, including Margaret McLaughlin, a widow, supposedly in secret. The sisters wound up being imprisoned. One version is that they refused to drink to the king's health. And then they were put into the thieves' hole, where Margaret McLaughlin joined them shortly afterwards. This is the Martyrs' cell. When I was a kid and I stayed here, I'd pass it going up and down the stairs and wonder. Local tradition has it that it was the cell. It's not the actual cell. This one actually dates back to the 19th century when the present building was constructed. Still, when you're 5 years old and heading off to bed, it's a wee bit spooky. To be honest, when you're 45 years old and heading off to bed, it would probably be just as spooky.
The media is your enemy. People were deluded. Black Lives Matter released their 990 IRS filings. They collected 80.
Let's again stop this.
The women were indicted for having been present at the Battle of Bothwell Bridge, which seems kind of unlikely, and for having been at 40 Covenanter services, which were known as Covenanticles. That's a good word. They were required to take an oath of abjuration, swearing allegiance to the king. Refusal to take the oath essentially meant you could be executed without trial. Men were hung and shot, but women were drowned. All three refused to take the oath and were found guilty on all charges and sentenced to be tied to the palisades fixed in the sand within the flood mark of the sea, and there to stand till the flood overflowed them. Margaret Wilson's father, Gilbert, went to Edinburgh to plead with the Privy Council of Scotland. He managed to get his younger daughter, Agnes, set free for a bond of £100 Scots. Reprieves were written out for the two Margarets and dated for the 30th of April. But the duty of execution fell to Robert Grierson of Lag, who was known locally as the Cruel Lag. Grierson was given the king's commission of suppressing the rebels, and he took it seriously. 11 days after the reprieve was signed, the Cruel Lag carried out his sentence. I know what you're thinking. Where's the... It would have been standing in the tidal estuary of the River Bladnoch on the banks of the Solway Firth. The river was diverted in the 19th century to build a new harbour. The women were tied to the stakes in the silt, and then they waited for the incoming tide. Margaret McLaughlin was placed further in, meaning that inevitably she drowned first, forcing the younger Margaret to hear her choking. It was a cruel tactic, but one that was clearly designed to make her repent or give in. As the tide came in and she started to struggle, she was offered a chance to pray for the king, and she said that she wished for the salvation of all men, but the damnation of none. Witnesses said she sang songs and quoted scripture. over the years, there has been some controversy about whether this actually happened. It was 20 years before the events were written down in the Kirk session records of both Kenningham and Kirkinner parishes. They were backed up by elders and ministers who were present on the day, and the records were confirmed by the local church. It was still within living memory, and Margaret McLaughlin's daughter was one of the witnesses. The controversy hangs on the fact that there was a pardon. And don't forget, this was around the time of the Jacobite Rebellion, when the Stuart kings were trying to get back on the throne. Not everyone wanted them to be the villains of the piece. Some of the records are pretty harrowing. The Kirkinner parish records say that Margaret McLaughlin's head was held down within the water by one of the town officers using his halberd at her throat till she died. Local legend has it that he told her to take another drink, and that for the rest of his life he had an unquenchable thirst and had to drink from every stream and ditch he passed. Seems fair. A constable named Bell was said to have carried out his duties with a complete lack of feeling. When he was asked about the scene, he supposedly said, "Oh, they just clept round the stobs like partons and prayed." Clept means web-footed. Partons are crabs. Stobs are the stakes. Bell's wife bore 3 children, all with clep fingers, and the family was referred to as the Cleppy Bells, which was believed to be the sins of the father being revisited on the children. As for the cruel lag, he was said to have been in hell before he died, with his saliva burning holes where it fell, and his feet boiling puddles when he stepped in them. The stories inspired books, monuments, artwork for hundreds of years. This is Wigtown's Martyrs Monument at the top of the appropriately named Windy Hill. This is a painting of Margaret Wilson by the artist Mealy, and this is a monument to her in Mar Place Cemetery in Stirling. So why is it so personal to me? Well, aside from having to walk past that cell all the time when I was a kid, and living here and working on the farm Margaret Wilson grew up on, the name Mulroy is quite an unusual one. It's one I've taken a lot of flack for over the years. My granddad was called John Mulroy Glenn Parker. He passed on those middle names, and so did my dad, and so did I. Yeah, I know, that's probably some kind of child cruelty, especially as I've spent half my own life telling people it's not pronounced Milroy, that I'm not a pimp, or Milhouse from The Simpsons. But you know, tradition. The name's only actually been recorded from sometime around the 17th century. So the guy in that grave behind me, John Mulroy, is either an uncle or a cousin a few generations removed. Fair play to him. I'd be taking the oath, with my fingers crossed behind my back. See you next time, when I'll be telling you about a guy called William Wallace.
So that's from Scotland Unplugged. And that's the story of the two Margarets. Again, it's really, I think it's important for people to understand that history, to be weary of it. And if you're a Christian, to understand what the faith that this had, and to ask yourself, as governments around the world become less and less friendly to Christians, governments that were once considered Christian, governments of Christian countries, would you have that type of faith? And why is it important as a genealogist and understanding your family? Because chances are, if you're your Scottish family is Protestant, they went through that period with the challenge, with the fear of their life, and this would influence them for generations, and including the generations that arrived on the shores of North America 100 to 150 years later. Scottish history is interesting. All history is interesting. I'm a person who loves history. But to take and look at it through the lens of today and put value, today's values on it would be wrong. To take it for what it's saying, what happened to these men and women, these 18,000 people that were killed, tortured, basically, especially in the case of these women, for having faith, for not saying that the king is king of the church, has the rights and rules to rule over the church. Something that is fundamental to most all Protestant religions, really, except Anglicanism. Most Protestant churches wouldn't. One of their reasons for being was to not have that the king or the monarch or an emperor be more than more than the state. So really important understanding of the separation of church and state. A lot of times but they also didn't want. There was a certain separation that was wanted, in the sense that the rulers, and it's continued in the history in Scotland and Scottish churches. The church that I belong to now, the Free Church, was created out of the Church of Scotland, specifically. Very similar thing. The landowners and still wanted control over who could be appointed in the ministers and the congregations. And a group of Scottish ministers, Church of Scotland ministers, in 1843, they separated, and they brought a large portion of the national church with them. They separated over the right of state interference. That's the free part. It's nothing to do with you don't tithe, unfortunately. But no, it has to do with that being free from state control. So what? Just winding up here, and I like to do as usual. I usually go into what I call my last call. So let me ring my bell. I'm gonna try to pull that bell there, and we'll see what happens.
Last call!
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time I need to announce it's last call at the bar.
Oh.
So, if you have any questions about this or anything in relation to Scottish history or genealogy, here's a good chance to ask it. It's a free for all. Feel free to ask. And if you don't feel like asking live, you can always leave it in a comment, or you can email me. If you go to the About section on my page, you will see that there is an email address. It is simply info@howwegothere.ca. You email me at that, and I can take a look, and maybe we'll have a future live stream talking about that. So thank you for watching. I really appreciate it. And until next time, farewell.
Things change. Farewell, farewell, my friend. Things change. Farewell, my friend. Farewells, they're not forever. They mean I'll miss you till we meet again. Things change. Farewell, farewell.